Okay, so have you ever felt like kind of overwhelmed by just like the sheer volume of podcasts out there?
Yeah, definitely.
Like you're scrolling and it's just like everything kind of blends together, you know?
It's like this weird paradox where everyone's trying to stand out, but they all end up sounding kind of same.
Right, and it's like we forget what got us excited about podcasting in the first place, like that initial spark of, I have something to say.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the technical aspects or like trying to emulate what's popular.
Totally, but okay, get this. This deep dive is taking us to the circus.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Not literally, although that would be pretty cool, right?
A podcasting trapeze act. I'm here for it.
Right. We're actually unpacking this episode of Podtastic Audio that uses the Greatest Showman to talk about what makes a podcast stand out.
Interesting. So it's like finding your own spotlight in a crowded big top.
Exactly. And the episode really zeroes in on this idea of authenticity over everything.
Which makes total sense, especially in podcasting, where it's all about your voice and your story.
It's like your voice is your brand.
Exactly. And that's something this podcast host, Chris, really emphasizes.
Yeah, he totally walks the walk.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, he actually shared this really personal story about facing a health challenge, and it really struck me how powerful vulnerability can be in connecting with listeners.
I'm always curious about how people bring their personal lives into their podcasts.
Yeah, so he was talking about being diagnosed with skin cancer and needing surgery on his ear, and imagine sharing that on a podcast about podcasting.
Wow, that's pretty out there.
Right. But it instantly makes you think, wow, this guy is real.
Totally. It breaks down those barriers between the host and the listener.
It's like, hey, I'm a human being just like you with fears and experiences and a story to tell.
And isn't that what we all crave? That human connection.
Exactly. And Chris actually argued that listeners connect more with genuine personality than a perfectly edited soundboard.
Which is kind of freeing when you think about it. You don't need $1 million studio to make something meaningful.
A simple microphone and your authentic self, that's powerful stuff.
So how do we actually stand out? Because there's a lot of podcasts out there.
Right. Well, Chris pointed out this hilarious trend. I think we've all noticed it. Everyone's trying to sound the same.
Oh, yeah, and even look the same.
Yes. Remember when we were talking about those YouTube podcast clips? It's like a sea of identical microphones and studio setups.
It's like we're all trying to fit into this tiny box when we should be building our own gloriously weird and wonderful tents.
Yes. And that's where finding your niche comes in. Chris talked about stumbling onto this really specific YouTube channel. You wouldn't think it would have much appeal, but it totally sucked him in.
I've had that experience too. It's like discovering a hidden treasure.
Right. And those niche audiences, they're often the most engaged and loyal because they've finally found someone who speaks their language.
It's like finding your tribe, that group of people who get you quirks and all.
And that brings us to the power of personal stories, which Chris is a huge advocate for. He told this really relatable story about almost missing his son's birthday because he was so caught up in editing a podcast episode.
It makes you realize he's just a regular person trying to figure things out like the rest of us.
Right. Even podcasting gurus miss birthday cakes sometimes.
Exactly. It brings a level of relatability and authenticity to his message.
And speaking of authenticity, I'm a firm believer that stories help us remember things better.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like those sticky notes for your brain, but instead of facts, it's emotions and experiences.
It's the difference between hearing a lecture and having a conversation.
Yes. And Chris actually touched on how AI, as advanced as it is, can't replicate those genuine human moments.
That's a really interesting point.
Like we connect with shared experiences, the raw, messy, beautiful reality of being human.
It's that human element that really resonates.
But okay, for anyone listening who's ever gotten a bad review, or maybe even some well-intentioned but soul-crushing feedback from friends and family.
Oof, yeah, we've all been there.
Chris had some really interesting thoughts on dealing with criticism.
Okay, I'm curious, how does he handle that?
Well, he connected it back to The Greatest Showman. Remember that scene where Barnum's vision is slammed as circus humbug?
Oh, yeah. I see the connection, putting yourself out there only to be told it's not good enough.
It's like you poured your heart into something and someone's using it as a doormat.
Ouch. I feel that.
Right. And it's so easy to let those voices hold you back, especially if they're coming from people you care about.
Absolutely. It can be really tough to separate the feedback from the emotions.
But what Chris highlighted so well is the power to reframe criticism.
Okay, so how do we do that? Because sometimes it just feels like a punch in the gut.
It's about shifting your perspective. Instead of seeing criticism as a sign to stop, heal, View it as valuable data.
So it's like turning that negative energy into something constructive.
Exactly. It might sting, sure, but it can also help you refine your craft, understand your audience better, and ultimately prove those naysayers wrong.
I love that. Turn that humbug into a hurrah.
Right. And it reminds me of something else Chris talked about, the freedom we have as indie podcasters.
Oh, yeah. We have the power to experiment, be niche, and create the show we truly want to make.
Exactly. We might not have million-dollar studios or a team of producers, but we have something even more valuable. We have the freedom to be ourselves. Chris actually called it building your own tent, like a space where like-minded people who just vibe with your unique voice and perspective can gather.
It's that sense of belonging, finding your people.
Yes. And you know what? It circles back beautifully to The Greatest Showman.
Well, how so?
It's not just about the flashy circus acts. It's about finding those people who make you feel seen and celebrated for exactly who you are.
Even if the rest of the world calls you humbug.
Right. So for everyone listening who's feeling that spark of inspiration, ready to embrace their inner Barnum and create something extraordinary,
let's empower them. What's one tiny but oh so powerful action step they can take?
if that podcasting dream feels daunting, just ask yourself, what's one authentic thing you can add to your very next piece of content?
It doesn't have to be huge.
Exactly. Maybe it's a quirky sound effect, a personal story only you can tell, or a sentence that just reveals your true voice.
Because even a massive audience of millions starts with just one person connecting with that genuine spark.
It's about those individual connections, those moments where someone goes, wow, that's me. They get me. That's the real magic.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Go out there and make some magic. Thanks for diving deep with us today.